The stagecoach wheels hit a rut so deep that Vivienne Garrett flew from her seat and crashed against the ceiling, before landing hard on the wooden floor between the benches. Blood trickled from her temple as she struggled to push herself upright, her green traveling dress torn at the shoulder. Through the window, she glimpsed what had caused the driver to swerve so violently. 3 men on horseback blocked the narrow mountain road, bandanas covering their faces, rifles aimed directly at the coach. It was June of 1873, and Vivienne had been traveling through the Colorado Territory for 2 weeks, making her way toward Aurora, a mining town nestled in the foothills where her aunt supposedly ran a boarding house. She had left St. Louis with nothing but a carpet bag and the clothes on her back after her father died, leaving behind debts that his creditors expected her to satisfy through an arranged marriage to a banker 3 times her age. At 22 years old, Vivienne had chosen the uncertainty of the frontier over a life of comfortable misery. The stagecoach lurched to a halt. She heard the driver's voice, high and strained with fear, promising the bandits they could take whatever they wanted. Heavy boots hit the ground outside. The door flew open, and a man with cold blue eyes visible above his bandana gestured with his pistol for her to step out. Vivienne's hands shook as she gathered her carpetbag. The afternoon sun blazed down on the dusty road as she emerged, squinting against the brightness. The 3 bandits rifled through the cargo while the driver sat frozen on his perch, hands raised. One of the men grabbed her bag and dumped its contents onto the ground. Her few dresses, a photograph of her mother, a leather-bound journal, all scattered in the dirt. "This all you got?" the blue-eyed bandit demanded. "No jewelry, no money. I have nothing of value," Vivienne said, hating how her voice trembled. "I am traveling to live with family because I have no means of my own." The bandit stepped closer, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Pretty thing like you might fetch a good price in some of the mining camps. Boys up there get lonely." Terror flooded through her veins. The driver would not help her. These men could take her anywhere, and no one would know what happened. She thought of running, but there was nowhere to go except empty wilderness stretching in all directions. A gunshot cracked through the air, so close that Vivienne dropped to her knees with her hands over her ears. When she looked up, the blue-eyed bandit was clutching his hand, his pistol lying in the dirt several feet away. Blood seeped between his fingers. All 3 men spun toward the source of the shot. A rider approached from the direction they had just come, a lone figure on a gray horse, moving at an easy canter as if he had all the time in the world. He wore dusty brown trousers, a dark shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. A rifle rested across his saddle, still smoking from the shot he had just fired. "That is far enough, friend," one of the other bandits called out, raising his own weapon. "This does not concern you." The rider stopped about 30 yards away but made no move to lower his rifle. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the distance, calm and steady. "I disagree. Seems to me you are about to make a serious mistake with that young lady." "There are 3 of us and 1 of you," the blue-eyed bandit snarled, cradling his injured hand. "You may have gotten lucky with that shot, but you will not walk away from this." The rider tilted his head slightly. "I counted 3 of you. You counted 1 of me, but you did not account for the fact that I can put a bullet through a man's hand from 30 yards while riding. Now imagine what I can do sitting still." He shifted the rifle slightly, aiming it with deliberate precision at the man who had spoken. "I suggest you gentlemen mount up and ride out while you still can." A tense silence stretched across the road. Vivienne remained on her knees in the dirt, afraid to move or even breathe. The afternoon heat pressed down on them like a weight. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, The bandits exchanged glances. The blue-eyed one cursed viciously but jerked his head toward their horses. "This is not over," he spat in the direction of the lone rider. They mounted quickly, the blue-eyed man struggling to pull himself into the saddle with one good hand, and then they were galloping away, a cloud of dust marking their retreat. The rider waited until they disappeared around a bend before nudging his horse forward. As he drew closer, Vivienne could see him more clearly. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly over his collar and striking gray eyes that surveyed the scene with careful attention. His face was sun-weathered but handsome, with strong features and a day's worth of stubble on his jaw. He dismounted and walked toward her, moving with an easy grace that suggested both strength and control. When he reached her, he crouched down to her level, his gray eyes full of concern. "Are you hurt, miss?" Vivienne touched the cut on her temple and her fingers came away bloody. "I hit my head when we swerved to stop, but I think I am all right otherwise. Let me see." His voice was gentle as he produced a clean handkerchief from his pocket. He dabbed carefully at the wound, his touch surprisingly light for such strong-looking hands. This close, she could smell leather and sage and something else, perhaps pine soap. "Not too deep. Head wounds bleed more than they should, but you will be fine." "Thank you," Vivienne managed. "If you had not come when you did, I do not know what would have happened to me." The cowboy helped her to her feet, keeping a respectful hand at her elbow until she steadied. "Good timing, I suppose." He began gathering her scattered belongings, treating each item with care as he returned them to her carpetbag. He lingered over the photograph of her mother, a sad smile crossing his face before he placed it gently inside. The stage driver finally found his voice. "Much obliged, mister. Those men had the drop on us. Name is Horace Fletcher, and I have been driving this route for 5 years. Never seen anyone shoot like that." The cowboy straightened, brushing dust from his knees. "Samuel Xander. Most people call me Sam." Vivienne held out her hand, remembering her manners despite the lingering shock. "Vivienne Garrett. I am traveling to Aurora to stay with my aunt." His hand enveloped hers, warm and calloused. "Miss Garrett." He held her gaze for a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Vivienne felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. Then he released her hand and turned to the driver. "Are you able to continue? That wheel took some damage when you swerved." Horace climbed down to inspect the coach. After a few minutes of examination, he shook his head. "The rim is cracked. I can get us to Aurora, but it is going to be slow going. We were still about 2 hours out, so now maybe 4. "I will ride along with you," Sam said. "Those men might circle back, and I would feel better knowing Miss Garrett reaches town safely." The relief Vivienne felt was so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them back quickly and nodded her thanks. As Horace worked to secure the damaged wheel as best he could, Sam retrieved his horse and checked his rifle. Once they were ready to move again, Vivienne settled back inside the coach while Sam mounted his gray horse. They set off at a careful pace, the coach creaking ominously with each turn of the damaged wheel. Through the window, Vivienne watched Sam riding alongside them, scanning the landscape with alert eyes. He sat his horse with the ease of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. She pressed the handkerchief he had given her against her temple, where the cut still throbbed. The white linen was already stained with her blood. She would need to wash it and return it to him, though part of her wanted to keep it as a reminder of this strange afternoon. The road wound through stands of pine and aspen, climbing gradually into the foothills. The air grew cooler and thinner. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they finally rounded a bend, and Aurora came into view. The town sprawled across a valley between two ridges, a collection of wooden buildings that had sprung up around the silver mines dotting the hillsides. Main Street cut through the center, lined with storefronts and saloons, a church with a white steeple, and what looked like a hotel. Even from a distance, Vivienne could hear the sounds of activity, the ring of hammers, the rumble of ore carts, the shouts of men going about their business. They rolled into town as the last light faded from the sky. Lanterns glowed in windows up and down the street. Sam helped Vivienne down from the coach, and she stood for a moment looking around, trying to orient herself in this new place that was to become her home. "You know where your aunt lives?" Sam asked. Vivienne pulled a worn letter from her pocket. "She runs a boarding house on Prospect Street. Mrs. Catherine Montgomery, though she would be my mother's sister." "I know the place," Horace said from his perch. "2 streets over, the big yellow house with the wrap-around porch." Sam retrieved Vivienne's carpet bag from the coach. "I will walk you there if that is all right with you." She nodded, grateful for his continued protection. They said goodbye to Horace, who was already examining the damaged wheel and muttering about the work ahead of him. Then Sam led the way down Main Street, his horse following behind him with patient steps. Aurora at night was louder than Vivienne had expected. Piano music spilled from a saloon they passed, along with raucous laughter and the clink of glasses. Men stood in small groups on the wooden sidewalks, smoking and talking. A few turned to watch as she and Sam walked by, their eyes lingering on her face in a way that made her glad she was not alone. "It is rough here," Sam said, as if reading her thoughts. "Mining towns attract all types, but there are good people too. Your aunt has a solid reputation. She will take care of you." "Have you lived in Aurora long?" Vivienne asked. "About 3 years. I came out from Kansas looking for work. Found a job at one of the ranches outside town working cattle." He glanced at her with a slight smile. "It is hard work, but honest. Better than some of the alternatives." They turned onto a quieter street where houses sat back from the road behind small yards. The yellow boarding house was easy to spot, a 2-story structure with the promised wrap-around porch and warm light glowing from several windows. Flower boxes lined the porch railing, filled with hardy blooms that had managed to survive at this altitude. Sam walked her to the front steps, but did not climb them. He set her carpetbag down and touched the brim of his hat. "I hope you settle in well, Miss Garrett. Aurora can seem rough at first, but you will find your place." Vivienne clutched her bag, suddenly reluctant to see him go. This stranger had saved her from a terrible fate, had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, and now he was about to walk out of her life forever. The thought created an unexpected ache in her chest. "Mr. Xander," she said quickly, before she could lose her courage, "would you be willing to stay for supper? It is the least I can do to thank you properly for what you did today." He hesitated, and for a moment she thought he would decline. Then he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face and made him even more handsome. "I would be honored, Miss Garrett." The front door opened before Vivienne could knock, and a woman appeared in the doorway. Catherine Montgomery was in her late 40s, with the same dark hair and green eyes as Vivienne's mother, though streaked with gray and framed by laugh lines. She wore a simple blue dress and an apron, and when she saw Vivienne, her face lit up with joy. "Vivienne." "Oh, my dear girl, you are here at last." Catherine rushed down the steps and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I have been watching for the stage all day. When it did not arrive on time, I started to worry." "We had some trouble on the road," Vivienne said, returning her aunt's hug. The familiar comfort of family nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. "But Mr. Xander helped us. "He saved my life, Aunt Catherine." Catherine stepped back, taking in Vivienne's torn dress and the cut on her temple with growing alarm. Then she looked at Sam, who stood quietly beside his horse. "Mr. Xander, I owe you a debt I can never repay. Please come inside. Both of you look like you could use a good meal and some rest." Sam tied his horse to the porch rail and followed them inside. The boarding house was warm and welcoming, with polished wood floors covered by colorful rugs, walls papered in cheerful patterns, and comfortable furniture arranged in the parlor. The smell of cooking drifted from the back of the house, something savory that made Vivienne realize she had not eaten since breakfast. Catherine led them to a dining room where a long table was set for supper. Several men were already seated there, boarders who worked at various jobs around town. Catherine made quick introductions, though Vivienne would not remember all their names. They nodded politely and returned to their conversations about the day's work. Over a meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, Vivienne told her aunt about the attempted robbery, though she left out the worst of what the bandit had threatened. Catherine listened with a hand pressed to her chest, her face pale. "Those must have been the Carson gang," one of the boarders said, an older man with gray whiskers named Dutch. "They have been hitting stages all through these parts for months now. The sheriff cannot seem to catch them." "They may think twice before trying again," Sam said quietly. "At least for a while." After supper, Catherine showed Vivienne to a small bedroom on the second floor, simply furnished but clean and comfortable. "You rest tonight, dear," her aunt said, smoothing the quilt on the bed. "We will talk more tomorrow about everything. I am so glad you are here safely." When Vivienne came back downstairs, she found Sam on the front porch preparing to leave. The night air was cool and filled with the scent of pine. Above them, stars blazed across the sky in numbers she had never seen back in St. Louis. "Thank you again, Mr. Xander," she said, joining him at the porch rail, "for everything. Just Sam is fine." He looked out at the darkened street, then back at her. "Will you be all right here?" "I think so. My aunt seems wonderful, and this place feels like it could be a real home." She paused, then added, "I hope I will see you again." His gray eyes met hers, and something passed between them in that moment, a connection she could not name but felt deep in her bones. "I would like that, Miss Garrett, very much." "Vivienne, please," he smiled. "Vivienne." The way he said her name sent warmth through her despite the cool air. "I usually come into town on Saturday afternoons for supplies. Perhaps I might call on you then, if that would be acceptable." "I would welcome it." Her heart was beating faster than it should. Sam untied his horse and swung into the saddle. He touched his hat brim in farewell, and then he was riding away into the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading. Vivienne stood on the porch long after he disappeared, staring at the spot where she had last seen him. Inside, she found her aunt waiting with a concerned expression. "Let me clean that cut properly," Catherine said, leading her to the kitchen. As she worked, dabbing the wound with witch hazel that stung sharply, she said, "Sam Xander is a good man, one of the best I have met out here. But be careful, Vivienne. This is a hard place and people come here running from all sorts of things." "What is he running from?" Vivienne asked. "I do not know. He keeps to himself mostly. Works hard, stays out of trouble, treats everyone with respect. But there is something in his eyes sometimes, a sadness. Just remember that everyone has secrets, especially out here on the frontier." That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house settling around her, Vivienne thought about Sam Xander. She remembered the steadiness in his voice when he faced down 3 armed men, the gentleness of his hands as he tended her injury, the way his eyes had held hers in a moment of shared understanding. She barely knew him, yet she felt drawn to him in a way that defied logic. The week that followed passed in a blur of activity as Vivienne learned the rhythms of life in Aurora and her aunt's boarding house. Catherine ran the establishment with efficient warmth, providing her boarders with 3 meals a day, clean sheets, and a respectable place to sleep. In exchange, she charged reasonable rates that working men could afford. Vivienne threw herself into helping, learning to cook for a dozen hungry men, to scrub floors and wash linens, to manage the endless small tasks that kept a house running. The work was harder than anything she had done back in St. Louis, where servants had handled such matters, but she found satisfaction in it. Here, she had purpose. She was building something rather than simply existing as an ornament in someone else's life. Aurora itself revealed its character slowly. The town existed because of the silver mines, and everything revolved around that fact. Men worked brutal hours underground, risking cave-ins and lung disease for wages that might let them build a stake. Some struck it rich and left for easier lives elsewhere. Most simply survived, day by day, in the hope that tomorrow might bring something better. But there was community, too. Women gathered at the church on Sundays, sharing news and supporting each other in a place where female companionship was precious. The general store served as a social hub where information flowed as freely as goods. Even the saloons, rough as they were, operated under unwritten codes of conduct that kept things from descending into complete chaos. Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Vivienne found herself watching the street from the parlor window more often than she should, her stomach fluttering with nerves. What if Sam did not come? What if he had forgotten about her? What if she had imagined the connection between them? At 2 in the afternoon, she spotted him riding down the street on his gray horse, sitting tall in the saddle. Her heart leaped. She forced herself to wait until he knocked on the door before answering, not wanting to seem too eager. He stood on the porch with his hat in his hands, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes. "Good afternoon, Vivienne. I hope I am not calling at a bad time." "Not at all. Please come in." She led him to the parlor, where Catherine had conveniently found reasons to occupy herself elsewhere, leaving them alone. They sat in armchairs across from each other, a proper distance apart, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Sam said, "How has your first week been?" Vivienne laughed, relieved to have something concrete to discuss. "Exhausting and wonderful all at once. I have never worked so hard in my life, but I like it. I like feeling useful." "Your aunt speaks highly of you already. She told Mrs. Henderson at the general store that you have been a blessing." "Mrs. Henderson, the woman who runs the store with her husband. They are good people. Mrs. Henderson makes the best pies in town and sells them on Thursdays." He smiled. "I thought perhaps you might like to walk down there with me. I need some supplies, and it would give you a chance to meet more of the town." They walked together down Main Street in the afternoon sunshine, and Vivienne felt eyes following them. She knew people were curious about the new woman in town, and particularly about why Sam Xander, who usually kept to himself, was spending time with her. Let them wonder, she thought. She was done living her life according to others' expectations. Henderson's general store was a treasure trove of goods stacked on shelves that reached to the ceiling. Mrs. Henderson, a round woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron, greeted them warmly. "You must be Miss Garrett. Your aunt has been singing your praises all week. Welcome to Aurora, dear." While Sam selected items he needed, coffee and tobacco and various other supplies, Mrs. Henderson drew Vivienne into conversation, asking about St. Louis and what had brought her west. Vivienne gave the edited version, mentioning her father's death but leaving out the part about fleeing an unwanted marriage. "It is hard starting over," Mrs. Henderson said with sympathy. "But you will find your feet here. Women like us, we are tougher than people think." As they left the store, Sam carried his purchases in a burlap sack. "Would you like to see some more of the town?" he asked. "There is a nice spot up by the creek where it is quieter." They walked to the edge of town where development gave way to wilderness. A creek rushed over smooth stones, lined by willow trees that provided dappled shade. Sam spread his coat on a flat rock near the water, gesturing for Vivienne to sit. "This is beautiful," she said, watching sunlight dance on the water's surface. "Do you come here often, when I need to think?" "It reminds me that there is more to life than work and worry." He sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really come west? A woman like you, educated, refined, you must have had options back in St. Louis." Vivienne considered how much to tell him, but something in his steady gray eyes invited honesty. "My father died and left debts. His creditors wanted me to marry one of them to settle what was owed. A man nearly 60 years old who looked at me like I was a horse he was considering purchasing." She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warmth of the day. "I could not do it, so I took what little I had and bought a stage ticket west." Sam was quiet for a moment. "That took courage, or desperation. Sometimes I am not sure which." "Courage," he said firmly. "Desperation makes people reckless. You made a hard choice and followed through. That is bravery." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold since her father's death. "What about you?" "My aunt says you came from Kansas." His expression changed, the openness closing slightly. "I did. My family had a farm there. Good land, but farming never suited me. I wanted to see what else was out there, so I headed west 3 years ago." There was more to the story. Vivienne could sense it, but she did not push. They all had secrets, as her aunt had said. "Do you miss it, Kansas?" "Some parts, but this is home now." He looked at her directly. Strange how a place can feel like home so quickly when the right circumstances come together. They talked until the sun began sinking toward the mountains, about small things and large ones, about dreams and disappointments, and the curious paths that had led them both to this creek in Colorado. Vivienne felt herself relaxing in his company, the constant tension she had carried for months gradually easing. As Sam walked her back to the boarding house, he said, "Would it be all right if I called on you again next Saturday?" "I would like that very much." She smiled up at him. "Perhaps we could take another walk by the creek." He returned her smile with one that made her heart skip. "It is a date, then." Over the following weeks, those Saturday afternoons became the highlight of Vivienne's week. Sam would arrive promptly at 2, always freshly cleaned up from his week's work, and they would walk together through town or out to the creek, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he had left Kansas after his older brother died in a farming accident, crushed when a wagon overturned on him. Sam had been 17, supposed to have been helping his brother that day, but had instead been in town. The guilt had haunted him, along with his father's cold silence that spoke louder than any accusation. So he had left, seeking a new life where that grief did not follow him. He learned that her mother had died when she was 12, leaving her alone with a father who loved her but did not know how to show it, who buried himself in business and drink until the debts piled too high. That the arranged marriage had been proposed a week after the funeral, while she was still wearing black. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms and hated oysters, that they could sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours with equal ease, that neither had felt truly understood by another person until now. On the 5th Saturday, Sam arrived with flowers, wildflowers he had picked from the meadow near the ranch where he worked. Vivienne arranged them in a jar on her bedroom windowsill, touching the petals gently and thinking about the hands that had gathered them for her. That afternoon, as they sat by the creek, Sam reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. "Vivienne, these past weeks have meant more to me than I know how to say. I feel like I can be myself with you in a way I have not been able to with anyone else." Her fingers interlaced with his. "I feel the same way. When I am with you, everything makes sense. The world feels less frightening." "I do not have much to offer," he said quietly. "I am a ranch hand living in a bunkhouse, saving what I can but never quite getting ahead. You deserve so much more than that." "I do not care about money, Sam. I ran from wealth back in St. Louis because it came with chains." She turned to face him fully. "What I want is to be with someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession. Someone who makes me laugh and feel safe. Someone like you." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "Then I am the luckiest man in Colorado." They sat together as the afternoon stretched into evening, hands clasped, shoulders touching, watching the creek flow endlessly past. Vivienne felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. This was what it felt like to be chosen, truly chosen by someone who knew who she really was. When Sam walked her home that evening, he paused at the bottom of the porch steps. "Vivienne, would you allow me to court you properly? I want to do this right." "Yes," she said, her smile so wide it made her cheeks ache. "Yes, Sam, I would like that very much." He climbed the first step, bringing their heights nearly level, and cupped her face gently in his hands. Then he kissed her, soft and sweet, a promise of more to come. When they parted, both were breathless. "Good night, Vivienne." "Good night, Sam." Catherine was waiting inside with a knowing smile. "That young man is completely smitten with you." "I am smitten with him too," Vivienne admitted, touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. "I am happy for you, dear. But be sure this is what you want. Ranch life is hard. You would be giving up any chance at an easier path." "I am sure, Aunt Catherine. I have never been more sure of anything." The courtship that followed was conducted with both propriety and growing passion. Sam came to dinner at the boarding house every Sunday, charming Catherine and the other boarders with his quiet competence and dry humor. He and Vivienne attended church together, sitting side by side in a pew and sharing a hymnal, their voices blending on the old songs. He took her to a dance at the town hall one Saturday night, where a fiddle player and his friends provided music that had the whole community stomping and whirling. Vivienne had learned formal dances back in St. Louis, but these frontier reels were something else entirely, wild and joyful and exhausting. Sam swept her through the patterns with confident hands, his eyes never leaving her face. In quiet moments, they talked about the future they were beginning to imagine together. Sam spoke of his dream to save enough to start his own small ranch, just a few head of cattle to begin with, and a house they could build together. Vivienne described the garden she would plant, the curtains she would sew, the home they would create. It was during one of their creekside conversations in late August that Vivienne asked the question that had been forming in her mind. The air had turned cooler with the approach of autumn, leaves beginning to show hints of gold and red. Sam had brought a blanket and they sat close together for warmth. "Sam, can I ask you something? Anything?" She watched the water flowing past, gathering her thoughts. "Do you believe in fate? That some things are meant to happen, that we are guided towards certain paths or people?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she worried she had asked something too philosophical, too foolish. Then he turned to her, his gray eyes intense and full of emotion. "I never did before," he said softly. "I thought we made our own choices and lived with the consequences, that there was no grand plan. But now, He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I do now that I have found you. Because there is no other explanation for what brought us together. Those bandits stopping the stage at exactly that moment. Me deciding to ride that particular road that day when I could have taken a dozen other routes. All of it leading to you standing there needing help and me being there to give it." He smiled, a beautiful, open expression. "Yes, Vivienne, I believe in fate now. You are mine and I am yours, and that was decided long before we ever met." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. She leaned forward and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it, all the love and gratitude and joy that filled her heart. He pulled her close, the blanket cocooning them together as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Vivienne. I know we have not known each other long and I still do not have much to offer, but I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes." The word came without hesitation. "Yes, Sam. Yes." He kissed her again, and this time there was triumph in it, celebration and promise. They stayed by the creek until the stars came out, wrapped in each other's arms, planning their future together. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning at the church in Aurora, with most of the town in attendance. Vivienne wore a simple white dress that Catherine had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Sam stood at the altar in his best suit, his eyes bright with emotion as he watched her walk down the aisle. Catherine gave her away, since there was no father to do it. The minister, a jovial man named Reverend Paul, led them through the vows with warmth and humor. When Sam slipped a simple gold band onto Vivienne's finger, his hand shook slightly, and she covered it with her own, steadying him. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Paul declared. "Sam, you may kiss your bride." And he did, while the congregation cheered and whistled their approval. The reception was held in the church hall, with tables laden with food that the women of Aurora had prepared. There was music and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. Mrs. Henderson presented them with a beautiful quilt she had made, each square different, representing the patchwork nature of frontier life. As evening fell, Sam borrowed a wagon from the ranch and drove Vivienne to the small cabin he had been preparing for weeks. It sat on a piece of land he had purchased with his savings, 5 acres on the outskirts of town with a view of the mountains. The cabin was just one room for now, but he had built it solid, with a good stone fireplace and real glass windows. "It is not much yet," he said as he carried her over the threshold, "but we will add on as we can. A bedroom, a proper kitchen, maybe a porch for sitting in the evenings." Vivienne looked around at the simple furnishings, the table and chairs he had made himself, the bed covered with the quilt from Mrs. Henderson, the wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. "It is perfect," she said, meaning it with all her heart. "It is ours." That night, in the privacy of their home, they came together as husband and wife with tenderness and passion. Sam was gentle, patient with Vivienne's innocence, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking softly about nothing important, just enjoying the freedom to be together this way. "I love you," Sam whispered into her hair. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Vivienne replied, pressing a kiss to his chest over his heart. "My fate, my choice, my home." Life as Sam's wife was everything Vivienne had dreamed and nothing she could have anticipated. The work was hard, harder than anything at the boarding house had been. They both rose before dawn, Sam to ride out to the ranch where he still worked while building their own herd, Vivienne to tend the garden and chickens they had acquired. to cook and clean and do the 1,000 tasks required to maintain even a simple homestead. But there was joy in it too. The satisfaction of eating vegetables she had grown with her own hands. The pride in wearing a shirt she had mended for Sam, keeping him warm through the winter. The pleasure of sitting together in the evenings, Sam reading aloud from the newspaper while Vivienne sewed, their feet touching beneath the table in casual intimacy. Winter came hard to the Colorado mountains that year. Snow piled deep around the cabin, and the wind howled through the passes like a living thing. Sam strung rope from the cabin to the barn so they could find their way during whiteout conditions. They burned through firewood at an alarming rate, and Sam spent long days chopping more. On the worst days, when going outside was dangerous, they stayed in bed for warmth, talking and making love and dreaming about spring. Vivienne had never felt closer to another human being than she did during those months when their entire world narrowed to the space of that cabin, and the two of them within it. In early January, Vivienne realized her courses had stopped. At first she dismissed it as stress or the hard work, but when another month passed and she began feeling nauseous in the mornings, she knew. She was pregnant. She told Sam one evening after supper, nervous despite knowing he wanted children. He simply stared at her for a moment, then let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Vivienne, we are having a baby." He became even more protective after that, insisting she not work too hard, hovering over her with concern that was both endearing and occasionally frustrating. But she understood it came from love, from the fierce need to protect those he cared about after losing his brother. Spring arrived with a rush of snowmelt that turned the creek into a torrent and the meadows into carpets of wildflowers. Sam worked with his boss to negotiate better terms, eventually buying 3 pregnant cows from the ranch on credit against his wages. It was the beginning of their own herd, the foundation of the dream they were building together. In June, with the help of the midwife Mrs. Henderson had recommended and Catherine at her side, Vivienne gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through a night and into the next day. There were moments when she was certain she could not continue, when the pain was too much. But then she would hear Sam's voice from the other room, where the men had banished him, calling out encouragement, and she would find the strength to push again. When the baby finally emerged, wailing his displeasure at the world, Vivienne wept with relief and joy. The midwife cleaned him and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Vivienne's arms. "You have a strong, healthy boy," she announced. Sam was allowed in then, and he approached the bed with tentative steps, as if afraid he might break something. When he saw his son for the first time, tears streamed down his face unashamedly. "He is perfect," Sam breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The baby's fingers closed around his, gripping with surprising strength. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Sam's brother. It felt right to give the child a name that honored the past while looking toward the future. James Xander would never know the uncle he was named for, but he would hear stories. He would understand that he came from people who persevered, who survived, who loved. Parenthood transformed them both. Sam, who had always been gentle, became tenderness itself with his son. He would sit for hours holding James, singing soft songs he remembered from his own childhood, his face full of wonder. Vivienne discovered reserves of strength and patience she had not known she possessed, getting up multiple times each night to nurse, functioning on fragments of sleep, and somehow finding joy in every moment. The years passed in a blur of hard work and small victories. Sam and Vivienne added on to the cabin, creating a separate bedroom and a proper kitchen. Their herd grew slowly but steadily. James learned to walk and talk, becoming an energetic toddler who followed his father everywhere, trying to help with chores in ways that were more hindrance than help but filled Sam with pride. When James was 3, Vivienne became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, which made it both easier and harder. The birth was quicker than James's had been, and in September they welcomed a daughter they named Rose after Vivienne's mother. With 2 children, the cabin felt full of life and noise and love. James was a protective older brother from the start, always wanting to hold Rose, to show her things, to make her laugh. Sam built a cradle that could rock with the push of a foot, and Vivienne would often find him standing over it, watching Rose sleep with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart ache. Money was always tight. There were years when the cattle prices dropped, and they survived on vegetables from the garden and game Sam hunted. Times when unexpected expenses, a horse going lame or the roof needing repair, meant going without things they wanted, but they had enough. They had each other and their children and the land beneath their feet. That was wealth, Vivienne thought, even if the bank would not count it as such. Aurora continued to grow and change around them. Some mines played out and closed, while new strikes brought fresh waves of prospectors. The town acquired a proper school, and when James turned 6, Vivienne walked him there on his first day. Her heart both proud and aching at how quickly he was growing. Catherine thrived as well, her boarding house becoming a permanent institution in Aurora. She was grandmother to James and Rose in all but blood, spoiling them with sweets and stories whenever Sam and Vivienne brought them to town. The connection to family, even chosen family, anchored them all. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sam surprised Vivienne by taking her back to the creek where he had proposed, leaving the children with Catherine for the afternoon. It was October again. The aspens turned brilliant gold, the air crisp with the promise of winter. They sat on the same flat rock, now worn smooth by a decade of weather and visits. Sam had brought a picnic, simple food but made special by the gesture. They ate and talked and laughed, remembering who they had been when they first met. "You have any regrets?" Sam asked at one point. "About choosing this life? It has not been easy." Vivienne thought about it seriously before answering. "No, I do not regret anything. We have worked hard and sometimes it is difficult, but I am happy." "Are you happy, Sam?" He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind so they both faced the creek. "Happy does not begin to cover it. You and the children, this life we have built, it is more than I ever dreamed of having. I wake up every morning grateful." She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Do you still believe in fate, that we were meant to find each other, more than ever?" He kissed the top of her head. "Everything I am, everything I have that matters. It all traces back to that day on the road when I happened to be riding past at the exact moment you needed help. If that is not fate, I do not know what is." They stayed until sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, reluctant to leave this place that held so many important memories. Finally, as stars began appearing overhead, they walked hand in hand back to where Sam had tied the wagon. The years continued their steady march. James grew into a tall, serious boy who loved working with the cattle as much as his father did. Rose was sunshine in human form, always laughing, always finding joy in the smallest things. Sam's hair began showing threads of silver at the temples. Vivienne found laugh lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. When James was 12 and Rose 9, Vivienne discovered she was pregnant again. The surprise of it, when she had thought that chapter of their life closed, left her reeling. She was 36 years old, and while women her age had babies, it was riskier than it had been in her 20s. Sam was thrilled and terrified in equal measure. He fussed over her even more than he had with the first 2 pregnancies, to the point where Vivienne had to remind him she was not made of glass. But she understood his fear. They had so much to lose now. The pregnancy was harder than the previous ones. Vivienne was tired constantly, and her body ached in ways it had not before. The midwife came by regularly to check on her, each time pronouncing that everything seemed fine. The baby was healthy, but Vivienne should take it easy. In April, 2 weeks before her due date, Vivienne went into labor suddenly while Sam was out checking on the herd. James, showing maturity beyond his years, ran to fetch the midwife while Rose stayed with her mother, holding her hand and trying not to cry. Sam made it back just as things were reaching their conclusion, racing into the cabin wild-eyed and breathless. The midwife barely spared him a glance, focused on her work. Minutes later, a baby's cry filled the cabin. "Another girl," the midwife announced, smiling. "And she has a healthy set of lungs." They named her Lily, completing a garden of flowers. She had Sam's gray eyes and Vivienne's dark hair, and from the start she was her own person, loud and demanding and full of personality. With 3 children, life became even more hectic and wonderful. The older 2 doted on their baby sister, competing for chances to hold her or make her smile. Sam and Vivienne navigated the chaos with practiced ease, having learned from the first 2 how to survive on limited sleep and unlimited love. When Lily was 2 years old, the ranch where Sam had worked for nearly 20 years finally sold. The new owner was bringing in his own men and did not need Sam's services. It was frightening at first, the loss of that steady income. But Sam had been saving and planning for years. Their own herd had grown to a respectable size, enough that with careful management, they could survive on it alone. It meant leaner times for a while, more work for everyone. James, now 14, took on responsibilities that would have been Sam's. Rose helped her mother with the endless cooking and cleaning and childcare that kept the household running. Even little Lily tried to contribute, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs with chubby, careful hands, but they made it work. By the time James was 16, tall and strong and capable, they were not just surviving but beginning to thrive. The herd continued growing. They bought another piece of adjacent land, expanding their grazing area. Sam hired a hand to help with roundups, a young man from town looking for steady work. Rose discovered a talent for needlework and began selling embroidered linens to the general store, contributing her earnings to the household with pride. Lily showed signs of being as stubborn and determined as her mother, already able to charm her father into anything with a smile. Vivienne sometimes looked around at her life and marveled at how different it was from what she had expected as a girl in St. Louis. That version of herself, worried about proper dresses and making advantageous matches, seemed like a stranger now. This woman, with work-roughened hands and sun-kissed skin and 3 children she would die for, this was who she had been meant to become. On a summer evening when James was 18, he approached his parents with nervous determination. They were sitting on the porch they had finally added to the cabin, watching Lily play with a kitten in the yard while Rose read nearby. "I need to talk to you about something," James said, standing in front of them with his hat in his hands, exactly the way Sam stood when he was anxious about something. "What is it, son?" Sam asked. "There is a girl in town, Mary Peterson, the seamstress's daughter. I have been seeing her and I want to ask her to marry me, but I wanted your blessing first." Vivienne felt her heart squeeze. When had her baby boy become a man ready to marry? But looking at him now, there was no denying it. He was 19 years old, fully grown, with his father's steady character and his mother's determination. "You love her?" Sam asked simply. "More than anything." "Does she love you?" "She says she does. I believe her." Sam stood and embraced his son. "Then you have my blessing." "Both our blessings." He looked at Vivienne, who nodded through sudden tears. "I remember what it was like to be young and in love. Do not waste time when you have found the right person." James married Mary Peterson in the same church where his parents had wed. Sam and Vivienne sat in the front pew, holding hands and remembering their own wedding day. Lily, now 7, served as flower girl with great seriousness. Rose cried through the entire ceremony. After the wedding, Sam and Vivienne helped James build a small cabin on the far side of their property, close enough to make working together easy but far enough to give the young couple privacy. It was strange adjusting to James not being in the house anymore, to having one fewer person at the table. But watching him build his own life, his own family, filled them with pride. Mary proved to be a perfect match for James, hardworking and practical with a warm heart. Within a year, she was pregnant, and Sam and Vivienne prepared to become grandparents, the circle of life continuing, each generation building on what had come before. Rose, at 17, showed no interest in boys yet, focused instead on her needlework and a growing interest in keeping accounts. She had a head for numbers and had taken over managing the ranch's finances, bringing an organization to it that Sam, who preferred working with cattle to working with ledgers, deeply appreciated. Lily, as she grew, proved to be the wildest of the 3 children. She could outride her siblings, outsmart them when she wanted to, and had no patience for things that bored her. Vivienne saw so much of herself in Lily, the rebellious spirit that had led her to flee St. Louis rather than accept a life she did not want. Time rolled on. James and Mary had 3 children, making Sam and Vivienne grandparents 3 times over. Rose eventually did meet someone, a widower who moved to Aurora with his young daughter. He was older than her, but kind and respectful, and Rose bloomed in his patient courtship. They married when she was 21, and she became stepmother to his little girl with grace and love. Lily was the surprise. She announced at 16 that she was not interested in marriage at all, that she wanted to travel and see the world beyond Aurora. Sam and Vivienne, remembering their own youthful need to forge their own paths, supported her even as their hearts ached at the thought of their youngest leaving. When Lily turned 18, she left Aurora with their blessing and enough money for a train ticket east. She promised to write, and she did, sending letters full of adventures and observations from cities they would likely never see. Vivienne kept every letter in a box, reading them over when she missed her daughter too much. Sam and Vivienne found themselves alone again for the first time in decades. The cabin felt too quiet without children filling it. But there was beauty in this season too, the freedom to focus on each other again, to rediscover the couple they had been before becoming parents. They took to sitting on the porch every evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. Sam's hair had gone fully gray, and he moved a bit slower than he once had. But to Vivienne, he was still the handsome cowboy who had saved her life on a dusty road. Her own body showed the years as well, her figure softer, her hair streaked with silver. But Sam looked at her with the same love and desire he had shown on their wedding night. Age had not diminished what they felt for each other. If anything, it had deepened it, tested by time and found unbreakable. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. The cabin and yard overflowed with family, 3 generations connected by blood and love. Catherine, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, presided over the gathering like a matriarch. As the party wound down and people began heading home, Sam drew Vivienne away from the crowd. They walked together to the creek, their special place, moving slower than they once had but still hand in hand. The aspens were golden again, just as they had been on so many important days of their life together. The creek flowed on, unchanging and eternal. They sat on their rock, worn smooth by decades of visits, and watched the water go by. 30 years, Vivienne said softly. It has gone so fast. Best 30 years of my life, Sam replied. Do you remember when you asked me if I believed in fate? Of course. You said you did now that you had found me. He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. I want you to know that I have never doubted it, not once in all these years. You were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. Everything we have built together, our children and grandchildren, this life we share, it all stems from that moment when fate put me on that road at exactly the right time to meet you. Vivienne leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. I love you, Sam, just as much now as I did then, maybe more. More, he agreed. Because now I know what we can endure together, what we can create. You are the great fortune of my life, Vivienne Xander. They stayed there until the stars came out. Two people who had become one through the years, still in love, still choosing each other every single day. As they walked back to the cabin that was now surrounded by their children's homes, creating a small compound of family, Vivienne thought about the scared young woman who had fled St. Louis all those years ago. That woman had been seeking safety and found so much more. She had found purpose, community, children, and grandchildren. But most of all, she had found love. True, enduring, fate-touched love. The years continued on, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Sam finally slowed down enough to let James take over most of the ranch work, though he still insisted on helping where he could. Vivienne spent her days surrounded by family, teaching her granddaughters to cook and sew, reading to the little ones, offering advice to the next generation as they navigated their own marriages and challenges. Lily eventually returned home after 5 years of traveling, bringing with her a husband she had met in San Francisco, an artist who looked at the mountains with awe and immediately began trying to capture them in paint. They built yet another cabin on the family property, adding to the growing settlement. When Sam and Vivienne celebrated their 40th anniversary, the whole town of Aurora turned out for the party. They had become fixtures of the community, respected for their hard work and devotion to each other. People told their story to newcomers as an example of what could be built in this hard land with determination and love. At the party, Sam gave a toast that left hardly a dry eye. 40 years ago, I was a lonely cowboy who had lost his way. Then I met a woman who needed rescuing, and it turned out she rescued me right back. Vivienne, you made me believe in things I had stopped believing in. Hope, love, fate. You gave me a family and a purpose and a reason to be better than I was. I would ride that dusty road 1,000 times if it meant finding you again. Here is to 40 years, and to whatever time we have left to love each other. That night, alone in their bed, Sam held Vivienne close. His body was frailer than it once had been, his breathing sometimes labored. But his arms were still strong enough to hold her, and his heart still beat steady and true against her cheek. No regrets, he whispered into the darkness. Not a single one, she replied. You are my fate, Sam Xander, you always were. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other and in the life they had built, while outside the Colorado wind sang through the pines and the stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging as the love they shared. The seasons turned. James proved to be as good a rancher as his father, and under his management, the family's holdings continued to grow. Rose's stepchildren had children of their own, adding more branches to the family tree. Lily's husband painted portraits of the family that captured not just their faces but something of their spirits, and Vivienne treasured everyone. On a spring morning in their 47th year of marriage, Sam did not wake up. Vivienne, lying beside him as she had for thousands of nights, knew instantly that he was gone. His face was peaceful, free of the pain that had plagued him in recent months. He had simply slipped away in the night while she slept beside him. The grief was crushing, a physical weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. For 47 years, he had been her companion, her love, her best friend. The world without him seemed impossible to navigate. But her children gathered around her, supporting her the way she had supported them through their own losses and hardships. They buried Sam on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot where he could see the mountains he had loved and the land he had worked. The whole town came to the funeral. Vivienne stood dry-eyed through the service, holding Lily's hand on one side and Rose's on the other, James standing behind them with his hands on her shoulders. Later, alone, she would weep. But in that moment, she needed to be strong for her children. After the funeral, Vivienne walked to the creek by herself. She sat on their rock and watched the water flow, remembering every conversation they had shared in this spot, every kiss, every moment of connection. The aspens were budding with new leaves, bright green and full of promise. "You were right," she said aloud to the empty air. "It was fate. We were meant to find each other, to build this life together. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for everything." A breeze rustled through the trees, and for a moment Vivienne could almost feel his presence beside her. Not gone, not really. Just changed, transformed into something that existed in memory and love and the children and grandchildren they had created together. Vivienne lived another 8 years after Sam's death, years filled with family and purpose. She watched more grandchildren grow up and marry. She held her first great-great-grandchild, a baby girl with gray eyes like Sam's. She spent her days surrounded by love, though she missed her husband with an ache that never quite faded. On a fall afternoon, sitting on the porch of the original cabin that was now surrounded by a veritable village of family homes, Vivienne felt a sudden lightness. She looked out at the mountains painted gold by the setting sun, at the land they had worked, at the family they had created. A sense of completion washed over her. That night, she died peacefully in her sleep, in the bed she had shared with Sam for so many years. Her children found her in the morning, her face serene, a slight smile on her lips. On the nightstand beside her was the photograph of Sam from their wedding day, held close. They buried her next to Sam on the hill, under a stone that read simply, "Vivienne Garrett Xander, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, taken by fate, guided by love." Their graves overlooked the ranch that continued to thrive, home now to 5 generations of their family. The story of Sam and Vivienne became family legend, told to each new generation. The story of how they met on a dusty road, how he saved her life, and she saved his right back. How they built something lasting out of nothing but love and determination. How when she asked him if he believed in fate, he said he did now that he had found her. Their great-great-grandchildren played in the meadows where Sam and Vivienne had walked. Their great-great-great-grandchildren tended cattle, descended from the original 3 cows Sam had bought so long ago. The cabin they built with their own hands still stood, carefully preserved as a reminder of where it all began. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was right, people swore they could see 2 figures walking hand in hand by the creek, hear the echo of laughter that might have been ghosts or might have been memory or might have been love, eternal and unbreakable, transcending even death itself. Because some things are fate, Some loves are meant to be, and some stories, once started on a dusty road in Colorado in 1873, never truly end. They just transform, passing down through generations, a legacy of courage and devotion and the unshakable belief that when you find the person you are meant to love, everything else falls into place. The ranch continued to prosper, growing from that humble 5-acre homestead into a sprawling operation that supported dozens of family members. Every year on the anniversary of Sam and Vivienne's first meeting, the family gathered at the graves on the hill for a picnic, telling the old stories to the young ones, keeping the memory alive. The town of Aurora itself eventually faded as the mines played out and people moved on to other opportunities. But the Xander Ranch remained, an anchor of continuity in a changing world. The values Sam and Vivienne had lived by, hard work, loyalty, love, family, these endured long after the individual lives had ended. Their youngest grandson, Lily's son, became a writer and penned a book about his grandparents' lives. He interviewed everyone who had known them, collected their letters and journals, and created a portrait of two people who had dared to choose love over convenience, hardship over ease, because they believed in something greater than themselves. The book became beloved in the family and beyond, touching readers with its story of ordinary people creating extraordinary lives through sheer determination and devotion. It reminded people that heroism was not always about grand gestures, but sometimes about the quiet daily choice to honor your commitments, to love through difficulty, to build something lasting. In the final chapter of that book, Lily's son wrote about visiting his grandmother in her last years. How she would sit on the porch for hours, staring at the mountains, sometimes talking to Sam as if he were still beside her. How once, when he asked if she ever wished she had made different choices, she had looked at him with those still bright green eyes and said, "Absolutely not." Every hard moment, every struggle, every sacrifice, they all led me to the most important thing, she had told him. They led me to your grandfather, and from him came all of this. She had gestured to the ranch, to the family homes, to the grandchildren playing in the yard. How could I regret any path that brought me to this? He was my fate. This was my fate, and I would not trade a single moment of it. Those words became the epigraph of the book, a testament to a life fully lived and a love that transcended all obstacles. As decades turned to over a century since Sam and Vivienne first met, their story remained central to the family's identity. New generations continued to visit the graves on the hill, to walk by the creek where their ancestors had fallen in love, to live in homes built on land those two pioneers had claimed and worked. The original cabin, now over 150 years old, was carefully maintained as a museum of sorts for the family. Inside, descendants could see the table Sam had built with his own hands, the rocking chair where Vivienne had nursed her babies, the trunk that had traveled with her from St. Louis. Photographs lined the walls, documenting the progression of lives from that young couple to the aged grandparents they became, surrounded always by family and love. And sometimes, on certain nights when the moon was full, and the air held a particular quality of stillness, ranch hands swore they could hear the sound of a woman laughing by the creek, followed by a man's deeper voice murmuring something that sounded like words of love. Whether it was really them or just the wind playing tricks, no one could say for certain. But the family liked to think it was Sam and Vivienne, still together after all these years, still choosing each other, still believing in the fate that had brought them together on a dusty Colorado road so long ago. Because some loves are too strong to be contained by a single lifetime. Some stories never truly end, And some people, bound together by fate and devotion and unbreakable commitment, remain connected across whatever veil separates this world from the next. Their legacy lived on not just in the physical things they left behind, the land and buildings and descendants, but in the example they set. When marriages in the family hit rough patches, as all marriages do, people remembered Sam and Vivienne working side by side through drought and hardship. When young people wondered if they had found the right person, elders told them about how certain Sam had been from the moment he met Vivienne, how that certainty had never wavered. The story became a touchstone, a reminder that real love required work and sacrifice and daily recommitment. That it was both destiny and choice, fate and free will, mystery and practical action all tangled together into something greater than the sum of its parts. And so, more than 150 years after a frightened young woman stepped off a stagecoach and into the protection of a lonely cowboy, their love story continued to shape and inspire the lives of people who had never met them, but who owed their very existence to the choices they made. It was, perhaps, the greatest legacy anyone could leave, proof that love, real love chosen and fought for and nurtured through all of life's challenges, could create something that lasted far beyond a single lifetime. Something eternal, built on faith and courage and the unshakable belief that when you find your fate, you hold on to it with everything you have and never let go.